It's a name you may not recognize, but one you probably should.
You would have thought that maybe that medal placing would have kind of solidified his place in history, that we'd all know George Poage's name, but somehow we don't.
George Coleman Poage was the first African American to win an Olympic medal. His story was recently brought forward by Todd Pritchard through the Wisconsin Foundation and Alumni Association at the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Okay, so that's him right there. I think George's story is an amazing story lost to history.
At just 4 years old, he and his family moved to La Crosse, Wisconsin, where they were taken in by a wealthy white family, providing young George a rare education.
Going into high school, he really blossomed. He became a track star. He graduated second in his class.
While many reports say Poage was the first African American to graduate from La Crosse High School, author Bruce L. Moser says otherwise. In his biography on Poage's life, he writes that 2 women of color graduated before him, making Poage the first African American man to graduate from the school.
He gave the graduation speech at La Crosse High School, where he talked about racism and why it's important that there needs to be a more of an equal footing for everyone.
At the turn of the century, Poage's talents brought him to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he quickly advanced as a track star on an otherwise all-white team.
George broke records left and right, was a Big Ten champion, the first African-American Big Ten champ for track and field.
Although Poage was respected by his teammates, his ethnicity became highlighted in regional newspapers, describing him as the colored wonder and the crack-colored sprinter of the Wisconsin team. Constant reminders that he was an outsider in a sport that was intended for Wisconsin's white athletes, according to Moser. He graduated UW-Madison with a degree in history and went on to the greatest track meet of his life, the 1904 Olympics, just the 3rd modern Olympiad. But he took the world stage at a time deeply embedded in racism. Spectator facilities were segregated at the Games in St. Louis, and African-American leaders called for a boycott. But Poage chose to run. And his choice to run solidified his place in history, becoming the first African-American to medal at the Games. He earned not 1, but 2 bronze medals for the 200 and 400-meter hurdles. You can find George Poage's name here alongside other Hall of Fame athletes at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, but it's his accomplishments after that have faded into history.
He really got lost in the pages of history, and you know, we're not really sure why.
Poage's time as a career runner ended with the 1904 Games. He went on to teach and later work for the Postal Service in Chicago. He died in 1962 at the age of 82.
One of the mysteries about George is why a man with such intellect and such talent ended up kind of fading into history. And I guess we have to kind of put ourselves in that place and that time.
More than a century later, just 2 years ago, his adopted hometown of La Crosse, Wisconsin ensured their community will never forget. In the city, you can now find George Poage Park and a statue of their track star honoring his legacy.
I think now, finally, people are recognizing what an amazing man George Poage was, and the accomplishments and the firsts.
Brittany Folkers, Local 5 News.